History does not begin with a single decision or a single person. It begins with systems, with movement, with time measured not in days but in output. Across vast industrial spaces, a complex machine was already in motion, built from steel, schedules, and human effort. Nothing here was accidental. Everything served a purpose. Inside the factories, day and night lost their meaning. Machines ran continuously, guided by workers who understood that precision mattered more than speed. Blueprints covered the walls, not just drawings, but instructions for coordination. Every measurement had consequences. Every delay echoed outward. Production lines moved forward steadily, not driven by urgency alone, but by discipline and repetition. This was manufacturing at scale, where consistency mattered as much as volume. At the shipyards, steel structures slowly took form. Massive sections were lifted, aligned, and secured with care. Cranes moved overhead like clockwork, while below, teams worked in silence, broken only by metal and steam. When a vessel finally reached the water, it marked the end of one process and the beginning of another. Nothing here stood still for long. Elsewhere, assembly halls stretched beyond sight. Aircraft frames advanced step by step through controlled environments. Engines were tested, surfaces inspected, every component verified before moving forward. On the runway, finished aircraft waited in careful alignment. Not symbols, but results of planning, labor, and coordination. Once airborne, they became part of a larger system already in motion. Production alone was never enough. What mattered just as much was where things went next. Rail yards, warehouses, and supply routes formed an invisible backbone. Crates were loaded, inventories checked, schedules updated. Trucks moved along long roads, often unnoticed, yet essential to keeping everything else moving. Here, success depended on timing, not attention. Convoys traveled steadily across open terrain. No unnecessary stops, no wasted motion. Routes were followed carefully, plans adjusted quietly when conditions changed. Maps showed simple lines, but real movement required constant awareness. Every turn, every pause, was part of a much larger calculation. Between operations, there were brief pauses, temporary shelters, simple meals, moments of rest. These scenes were quiet, often overlooked, yet essential. Behind every system were people, focused, tired, and committed to continuity. Even short moments of stillness served a purpose. As daylight faded, the work continued. Artificial light replaced the sun, but the rhythm stayed the same. Night operations demanded attention and restraint. Nothing rushed, nothing ignored. Maintenance checks, observations, preparation for the next phase. The system did not sleep. By morning, movement resumed. Vehicles departed one by one, camps emptied quietly. What remained behind was order, not absence. Every departure marked progress, not an ending, but a continuation elsewhere. When the landscape finally returned to stillness, the process itself carried on beyond the frame. Because systems like these do not rely on moments or individuals. They rely on continuity, and once set in motion, they shape everything that follows. History often turns not on a single battle, nor on a single decision, but on assumptions that go unchallenged. The story you have just seen is not merely about factories, ships, aircraft, or numbers on a production chart. It is about how deeply held beliefs can distort judgment, and how underestimating an opponent can become a fatal strategic error. The collapse of German expectations regarding American power was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Early dismissals of American capability were not based on evidence alone, but on ideology, experience filtered through prejudice, and a failure to imagine transformation. German planners measured America as it existed in peacetime and assumed that version was permanent. They did not consider what might emerge under pressure. That failure of imagination mattered more than any single weapon or campaign. At the heart of this miscalculation was a misunderstanding of systems. German leadership tended to evaluate strength through visible military readiness, standing armies, immediate firepower, and battlefield performance. America appeared weak by these measures in the late 1930s. Its army was small, its equipment outdated, its society appeared divided, comfortable, and distant from war. These observations were not entirely wrong, but they were incomplete. What German planners failed to understand was that American strength did not lie primarily in what already existed, but in what could be created. The true power of the United States was latent, embedded in its industrial infrastructure, its logistical culture, its educational systems, and its ability to coordinate vast, complex operations across distance and time. These were not easily visible on a parade ground or a battlefield, but they would prove decisive. Once mobilization began, the scale of transformation defied precedent. Factories were retooled at a pace that surprised even those overseeing the process. Industries that had never produced military equipment adapted rapidly. Supply chains stretched across continents and oceans, connecting mines, farms, refineries, railroads, ports, and assembly lines into a single coordinated machine. This was not elegance, it was efficiency through volume, repetition, and learning. The speed of adaptation was as important as the scale. Early failures did not halt progress, they accelerated it. Mistakes were analyzed, corrected, and absorbed into improved processes. This applied not only to manufacturing, but to training, logistics, and battlefield coordination. The system was designed to learn, even when individual components failed. That capacity to learn may have been the most underestimated factor of all. On the battlefield, early encounters seemed to confirm German expectations. Inexperience led to costly mistakes. Units faltered under pressure. Coordination broke down. But unlike rigid systems that conceal failure, the American approach exposed it. Defeats were not hidden or excused. They were studied. Lessons were distributed rapidly. Training programs changed in response to real combat data. Leadership was adjusted, doctrine evolved. This feedback loop, imperfect, sometimes chaotic, but relentless, steadily increased effectiveness. Over time, quantity was paired with growing competence. Industrial output fed training pipelines. Training fed operational capability. Operational experience fed back into production and doctrine. The entire structure reinforced itself. German institutions, by contrast, struggled to adapt once initial advantages faded. Early success bred confidence, then complacency. Doctrines hardened. Dissent became dangerous. Honest assessments were filtered or suppressed. Decisions increasingly flowed from the top down, guided by ideology and personal conviction rather than evidence. This rigidity turned early strength into long-term vulnerability. The contrast between these systems became unmistakable as the war progressed. Where one side replaced losses with learning and output, the other side replaced them with younger, less prepared personnel and increasingly desperate measures. Where one side expanded capacity under pressure, the other contracted under strain. Attrition, once thought manageable, became overwhelming. Yet it would be a mistake to reduce this outcome to numbers alone. Industrial output mattered, but so did human resilience. The individuals who operated these systems, workers, technicians, drivers, mechanics, planners, were not abstract resources. They were people adapting to new roles under extraordinary circumstances. Many had no prior experience in the tasks they were asked to perform. They learned quickly because the system around them was designed to support learning. This adaptability extended beyond factories and training fields. It reshaped society itself. Workforce participation expanded. Geographic mobility increased. New organizational methods emerged out of necessity. Temporary solutions became permanent improvements. These changes did not disappear when the conflict ended. They influenced economic, technological, and social development for decades afterward. In this sense, the war did not simply reveal American capacity, it accelerated it. The misjudgment that allowed this transformation to surprise German leadership was rooted in certainty. Certain beliefs about race, culture, and national character were treated as immutable truths rather than hypotheses to be tested. Evidence that contradicted these beliefs was dismissed as propaganda or coincidence. Predictions were made not from data, but from ideology. This is not a unique failure. History is filled with examples of leaders who mistook their assumptions for reality. What makes this case particularly instructive is how thoroughly the misjudgment permeated strategic thinking. It influenced decisions about alliances, resource allocation, timing, and priorities. It shaped the choice to expand the conflict rather than contain it. It delayed necessary adjustments until options had narrowed or disappeared entirely. By the time reality could no longer be ignored, the outcome was already determined. The final stages of the war exposed the full cost of this failure. Resources dwindled, mobility collapsed, production faltered, command structures fractured under pressure. Meanwhile, opposing forces advanced with logistical support that seemed inexhaustible by comparison. The imbalance was not merely military, it was systemic. What ultimately ended the conflict was not a single breakthrough, but the cumulative effect of sustained pressure applied by a system designed to endure. The outcome was shaped long before the final battles, in decisions made years earlier about how to understand the world. That is why this story matters beyond its historical setting. Modern conflicts, competitions, and rivalries still hinge on perception as much as power. Nations and organizations continue to assess one another based on surface indicators while overlooking underlying capacities. Economic systems, technological ecosystems, and institutional adaptability are still difficult to measure and easy to underestimate. The lesson is not that size or wealth guarantees success, it is that flexibility, learning, and coordination matter as much as raw strength. Systems that can absorb shock, correct errors, and scale effectively possess advantages that are not always visible until it is too late to counter them. Another lesson lies in the danger of ideological certainty. When belief replaces analysis, reality becomes optional. Decisions made in such an environment may feel confident, even bold, but they are often brittle. They break under conditions they were never designed to survive. By contrast, systems built on continuous evaluation, even when messy or inefficient, tend to grow stronger over time. The individuals who powered these systems rarely appear in headlines. They worked long hours, adapted to unfamiliar demands, and moved on when the task was done. Their contributions were not glamorous, but they were decisive. They remind us that large-scale outcomes often depend on ordinary people operating within effective structures. In remembering this history, it is important not to mythologize it. There was waste, error, and suffering on all sides. Progress was uneven, success was costly, but the overarching pattern remains clear. Misjudgment at the strategic level magnified every subsequent failure. The conflict did not end because one side was morally superior or technologically flawless. It ended because one side could sustain effort, adapt faster, and recover from loss more effectively than the other. That capacity was underestimated from the beginning. In the end, the greatest mistake was not underestimating weapons or tactics, but underestimating transformation. The inability to imagine change proved more damaging than any enemy action. History does not repeat itself exactly, but the mechanisms of error remain familiar. Overconfidence, selective perception, and the dismissal of inconvenient evidence continue to shape decisions in